The digital clock on my desk glowed in the dark, ticking toward midnight. 11:51 p.m., exactly 9 minutes before my 18th birthday. Then, the vibration. A text from my mother, Michelle. We have to cancel tomorrow. Rachel's venture fund deal was rejected, and she is in a total collapse. We need to focus on her right now. You understand, right? I watched the headlights of the catering van, which I had booked 6 months ago, as it backed out of our driveway. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just opened my laptop and I typed the final line of code. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. 12 a.m. The digital numbers shifted silently, marking the official arrival of my 18th birthday. I didn't feel older, just lighter. I didn't feel celebrated, just cleared. In the eyes of the law, I was finally an adult, which meant I could finally stop being an employee who was paid in resentment and secondhand clothes. I stood in the center of my room, the silence of our Palo Alto mansion pressing against my ears like a vacuum. My mother's text message was still glowing on my phone, a digital record of the moment the bridge finally burned to the ground. Rachel was in a total collapse. The family needed to focus on her. It was a script I'd been forced to read since I was 6 years old, but tonight I was rewriting the ending. I walked over to my desk and I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for comfort or distractions. I was looking for the backdoors I had built over the last 6 years. I'd been the shadow manager of this estate since I was 14, the only one who knew the difference between a functional household and a house of cards. My first move was clinical. I opened the encrypted folder containing the Henderson family budget. I watched the cursor blink, then I hit the command to scrub. 4 years of meticulously tracked expenses, tax records, and investment spreadsheets vanished into a string of zeros. I cleared the cache, and I scrubbed the metadata. If my father, Adam, wanted to know why his venture capital portfolio was hemorrhaging money, he'd have to learn how to do basic subtraction himself. Next was the medical portal. My father relied on me to manage his complex medication schedule, sync his heart rate monitors, and coordinate his specialist appointments through an app he barely understood. I logged out of the admin account, and I changed the recovery email to one they would never find. I did the same for my mother, Michelle's, social calendar. Every high-stakes lunch, every charity gala contact, and every gatekeeping password I had curated for her social club was deleted. I wasn't sabotaging them. I was simply removing the invisible labor they had never bothered to acknowledge. I was taking back my time, one deleted file at a time. The most satisfying part was the smart home system. Our villa was a fortress of automated luxury, all of it running on a technical architecture I had personally designed to keep Rachel's live streams running at peak efficiency. I navigated to the root directory, and I revoked all administrative privileges for their devices. I locked the climate control at 16 degrees Celsius, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and I set the Wi-Fi to shut down in exactly 6 hours. I disabled the remote overrides for the security cameras and the gate. By sunrise, this $1 million smart home would be nothing more than a very expensive, very cold box of steel and glass. I moved to my closet. I had been packing for this moment for 6 months, hiding small bags in the back of my car every time I went to the grocery store. I took only the essentials: my laptop, my high school diplomas, and the few sentimental items I had managed to protect from Rachel's constant envy. I had $5,400 in cryptocurrency saved from doing freelance coding jobs for startups while my family was out at country club dinners. I found a private landlord who valued immediate liquidity over a credit score. 6 months of prepaid rent in cryptocurrency bought me the privacy and the silence I desperately needed. I wasn't running away. I was liquidating my position in a failing enterprise. I walked down the grand staircase for the last time. The air in the foyer smelled like expensive lilies and ancient secrets. I placed my house key on the cold marble kitchen counter. Next to it, I laid a single sheet of paper. On it, I had typed a list of every password I had changed that night. Banking, email, security, utilities. I didn't just change the passwords. I revoked their trusted device status and deactivated their hardware tokens. Without my biometric approval, their expensive phones were nothing more than glowing paperweights. At the very bottom, in a bold, clean font, I wrote one sentence. My new password is my freedom. I resign from the position of daughter. I stepped out the front door, and I locked it behind me. The cool California air hit my face, and for the first time in 20 years, the weight on my chest vanished. I got into my car and backed out of the driveway, passing the dark windows of my parents' suite. They were sleeping, dreaming of Rachel's fake success, unaware that the load-bearing wall of their life had just walked out the door. As I drove away from the manicured lawns of Palo Alto, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like an architect who had just cleared the site for a much better building. I wasn't just arriving at a new apartment. I was finally arriving at myself. Sitting on the floor of my empty studio, the silence felt like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. In that quiet, the memories started to leak back in unbidden and sharp. I thought about the first time I fixed my father's budget at 14 years old. He had looked at me not with love, but with relief, as if I were a piece of software that had finally started working correctly. From that moment on, I wasn't just a child. I was the infrastructure. My parents, Michelle and Adam, didn't raise me. They managed me like a diversified asset class. The pay gap in our house was a cruel joke. Every month, $13,000 hit Rachel's account so she could maintain the illusion of being a tech visionary influencer. My parents called it an investment in the family brand. Meanwhile, I was told that struggle builds character. I spent my high school years working until 3 in the morning, taking freelance coding jobs just to pay for my advanced placement textbooks and university applications. While Rachel was being gifted a $45,000 custom tech suite for her bedroom renovation, I was the one ghostwriting her essays because she couldn't spell empathy without a spell check. People often ask why victims of such quiet cruelty stay for so long. They don't understand the invisible chains of the survivor. When you are raised in a house where love is conditional, you learn that your only value is your utility. I stayed because I was in a state of constant survival, what psychologists call the fawn response. I built a digital cage around myself, convinced that if I just made myself indispensable enough, if I fixed enough of their messes, they would finally see me as a daughter instead of a service provider. It was a house of cards, and I was the only load-bearing wall. I had spent years taping the wiring together and holding up the plywood props of their perfect Palo Alto life. I stayed because I was waiting for the law to catch up with my reality. I needed to be 18. I needed to be able to sign my own lease and own my own cryptocurrency without a guardian's signature. Those 4 years between 14 and 18 were a long, calculated wait. I wasn't being loyal, I was being patient. I was the silent observer, documenting every oversight, every cruelty, and every dollar they funneled into Rachel's delusion while I ate ramen in my room. They thought they had me under control, but they didn't realize that the person who runs the system is the only one who knows exactly how to crash it. I wasn't running away from my life. I was finally claiming the one I had built myself in the dark while they weren't looking. By sunrise, the ecosystem I had maintained for 6 years began to suffer total system failure. From the safety of my new studio, I watched the notifications pile up on my secondary device. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew the sequence of the collapse. It started with the temperature. The smart home system was locked at exactly 16 degrees Celsius, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. In a mansion made of glass and marble, that kind of cold feels clinical. It feels like a warning. My father, Adam, called 4 times before 8 a.m. He didn't leave a message, but I could picture him shivering in his study, staring at a router he didn't know how to reset. He didn't know the provider. He didn't know that I negotiated the fiber optic contract every single year just to keep the bandwidth high enough for Rachel's live streams. To him, the internet was just something that existed, like air. He never realized that I was the one pumping it into the house. 2 hours later, the cracks widened into a canyon. Rachel missed her flight to Tulum for a major influencer retreat. For years, I had been her uncredited travel agent. I tracked her itineraries, handled her digital check-ins, and timed the Uber Black to arrive exactly 7 minutes before she walked out the door. This time, she showed up at the wrong terminal 3 hours late because she couldn't read a 24-hour clock without help. She left me a voicemail that was 90% screaming and 10% threats to sue me for sabotage. She didn't seem to understand that doing nothing isn't sabotage. It's just reality. Then came the killing blow. My father missed a lunch meeting with a potential angel investor worth $40 million. I used to be the one who synced his calendar, sent the confirmation emails, and prepared the briefing notes so he wouldn't look incompetent in front of real money. Without me, the calendar alert never went off. He was sitting in his kitchen, probably arguing with my mother about why the toaster wouldn't work, while $40 million walked away from a steakhouse downtown. Watching the spiral from my quiet apartment, I realized something profound about the architecture of their lives. I used to be intimidated by them. I used to think their status was a solid thing, built on a foundation of genuine power. But standing outside of it, I saw the illusion of power of the empty wallet. My parents were just performers. Their entire existence was a state of cognitive dissonance, a massive gap between their reality and their self-image that could only be bridged by my constant, exhausting maintenance. They didn't own their position in society. They rented it. And the rent was paid in debt, in favors, and in my invisible, uncompensated labor. Their life was a stage set. From the front, it looked like a palace of innovation and wealth. But I was the one backstage, holding up the plywood props and taping together the fraying wires. When you remove the stage manager, the audience finally sees that the castle is made of cardboard. My mother finally managed to leave a voicemail that afternoon. Her voice was sharp, dripping with a desperation she tried to mask as authority. "Christina, you are being incredibly selfish," she hissed. "This house is falling apart, and you are playing games. Come home and fix this mess for your father immediately." She didn't ask if I was safe. She didn't ask where I was sleeping. She didn't even mention my birthday. They didn't miss their daughter. They missed the infrastructure. They missed the service provider who made them feel powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to the stage to tape the set back together. I was sitting in the audience, and the show was finally over. The silence of my first month away was a tool for construction. I spent every hour building my portfolio at the fintech startup, stacking my salary, and preparing for the next phase of my arrival. I found it in Midtown, a loft with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of industrial elegance that signaled you had finally made it. I walked into the leasing office with the confidence of a woman who had meticulously engineered her own stability. I had the income. I had the savings. I was ready to sign. The leasing agent, a woman who had been professional and warm for 20 minutes, suddenly stopped typing. Her face went slack. She turned the monitor away from me, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like an execution. She said there was a problem with my credit check. She said I was flagged. She said the words massive outstanding debt. I didn't argue. I didn't ask her to rerun the numbers. I knew her system wasn't lying. I walked out to my car, the Palo Alto sun feeling like a spotlight on a crime scene, and I opened my laptop. What I saw on the full credit report was not a clerical error. It was a massacre. There were 4 new accounts opened in the last 11 months, 3 high-limit credit cards, and 1 massive personal loan. The total balance was $550,000. I sat there in the parking lot, the air conditioning humming a steady, clinical rhythm, and I scrolled through the transaction history. It was a digital map of my sister Rachel's fake life. There were charges for an influencer retreat in Tulum that she had posted about with the hashtag blessed. Charges for a wardrobe overhaul that she claimed was gifted by high-end brands. There was a massive down payment on a Lucid Air Sapphire, the kind of car you buy when you want to look like you own the future, even if you're living in a bankrupt past. The dates lined up with surgical precision. They had started 3 weeks after I left. 3 weeks after I stopped providing my invisible labor, my parents had decided to harvest my credit score instead. They had been grooming my financial profile since I was 14, adding me as an authorized user on their elite accounts to build my credit history. They weren't being generous. They were fattening the lamb for slaughter. With a perfect 800 point score and my future inheritance as leverage, the banks didn't hesitate to hand them the keys to my life. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my identity to subsidize their delusion. I knew exactly how my father, Adam, and my mother, Michelle, had justified this in their heads. In their world, this wasn't theft. It was reimbursement. They believed I owed them this because they had raised me. They viewed me as a diversified asset class, and since I had resigned from my duties, they were simply collecting the back pay to keep the golden child shining. I looked at the signature on the loan application. It was a digital forgery, a clumsy imitation of my handwriting that only someone who had watched me sign their checks for years would attempt. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a feeling of betrayal, but there was only clarity. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. And now, the account was closed. A cold, metallic calm settled over me. This was no longer a family dispute about a canceled 18th birthday party or hurt feelings. They had crossed the line from toxic parenting into a federal crime. They had bet on my silence, betting that I was still the same girl who would swallow poison just to keep them warm. They bet wrong. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I closed my laptop, and I dialed a number I had saved for a crisis. It was time to stop being the fixer and start being the architect of their destruction. I did not reach for the phone to call Michelle or Adam. I didn't want explanations, and I certainly didn't want an apology. I wanted an extraction. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a forensic operation. I dialed the number for Emily, an attorney who specialized in high-stakes financial fraud and family identity theft. I was not paying her with my parents' money. I was paying her with the clean, hard-earned income I had built in the shadows while they were busy curating their fake reality. The process was surgical. Emily and her team of forensic accountants worked with a cold, relentless precision that mirrored my own. We compiled the evidence, the credit reports, the unauthorized digital signatures, and the undeniable timeline. The first fraudulent account had been opened exactly 21 days after I left the house. The IP addresses used for the loan applications traced directly back to the smart home system in Palo Alto, the very system I had built. It was not just theft, it was a betrayal documented in binary code. Emily drafted the lawsuit with lethal efficiency. It wasn't a cease and desist letter or a polite request for repayment. It was a formal complaint filed in civil court for identity theft, fraud, and emotional distress. We didn't send a warning. We didn't offer them a chance to hide. We served them. The strike happened on a Tuesday morning at the most exclusive golf course in Silicon Valley. My father, Adam, was on the ninth green performing the role of the successful venture capitalist for a group of potential investors. A process server walked directly onto the grass and handed him the thick manila envelope. Adam Henderson, you have been served. The silence that followed was expensive. In that circle, a lawsuit for $550,000 in identity theft is not just a legal problem. It is a social death sentence. The fallout was immediate and nuclear. Because the lawsuit was a matter of public record, the news hit the Silicon Valley investment forums like a bomb. My parents were no longer just the people whose daughter had thrown a tantrum. They were now a liability. The investors were already spooked by his erratic behavior and missed meetings. The lawsuit didn't just surprise them, it confirmed their fears that Adam Henderson was a forensic liability, and they pulled their interest before the market even opened. The empire didn't just crack, it began to disintegrate. My phone exploded with notifications, but I didn't answer. I let the voicemails from Michelle and Rachel pile up like trash. My mother's voice on the recordings shifted from disbelief to frantic pleading, then finally to a viciousness that confirmed everything I already knew. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me. They were shocked that I had stopped being the invisible anchor holding up their house of cards. They had bet on my silence, and they had lost everything. 2 weeks passed before the inevitable occurred. I was in my midtown loft, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that I had finally conquered on my own terms. The intercom buzzed a sharp, intrusive sound that didn't belong in my sanctuary. The doorman told me my parents were downstairs. I told him to let them up. I didn't do it out of a lingering need for their approval. I did it because I wanted them to see exactly what they were trying to harvest. When the elevator doors opened, they didn't look like the venture capital titans I had known. They looked like ghosts haunting the ruins of a theater. My father, Adam, who once wouldn't step out of the house without a tailored suit, wore a jacket that looked like he had slept in it. My mother, Michelle, had eyes that were blotchy and red from crying. They stood in my living room, surrounded by the minimalist, high-end furniture I had paid for with my own salary, and they looked incredibly small. "Christina, please," my father said, his voice cracking with a desperation he could no longer hide. "Please, drop the lawsuit. If this goes to trial, we will lose everything. The bank will take the house. I could go to jail." I looked at them, really looked at them, and I waited for the anger to rise. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, the moment that people who made me feel invisible were forced to beg for my mercy. But as I watched them weep in my living room, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel sad. I felt a profound, quiet indifference. In that moment, I realized that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. Hate means you still care. Hate means they still have power over you. Indifference means you are finally free. I was no longer the fawn or the fixer. I was the accountant, and the debt was due. "I will not drop the lawsuit," I said, my voice calm and steady as a balance sheet. "But I will offer you a settlement." They looked up, a pathetic flicker of hope in their eyes. "You will liquidate the house," I began, ticking the points off on my fingers. "You will sell the cars, the custom tech suite, and the imported furniture. You will pay off every single cent of the $550,000 in debt you took out in my name immediately." My mother sobbed, but I didn't stop. "You will sign a written confession admitting to the identity theft so that my credit report is legally cleared. And finally, you will sign a permanent no-contact order. If you ever try to reach out to me again, for any reason, the deal is void, and I will hand over the full forensic evidence to the district attorney. At that point, the choice of prosecution is out of my hands, and you'll be answering to a federal judge, not your daughter. But where will we live? Michelle whispered. What about Rachel? I met her gaze without a hint of the guilt they had used to control me for 2 decades. That, I said, is not my problem. They signed the documents. They had no choice. As they walked back to the elevator, I didn't feel like I had won a war. I felt like I had finally closed a book that should have ended years ago. They weren't my parents anymore. They were just a bad investment I had finally written off. 6 months passed, like a long, quiet exhale. I drove past the old Palo Alto estate one afternoon, more out of curiosity than any lingering attachment. The house looked different without my invisible labor holding it together. The gardens were overgrown, and a bold sold sign stood in the yard. I saw a moving truck in the driveway. My parents were loading the last of their curated assets into a rented van. Rachel was sitting on the curb, hunched over her phone, probably searching for someone else to blame for her reality. I heard she is working as a waitress now, a job where her personality actually has to function without a digital filter. I did not stop, I did not wave. I just kept driving into a future they are not invited to. My credit is restored. I have a career I built from the ground up, a home I pay for, and a circle of friends who love me for my presence, not my utility. I am no longer a diversified asset class. I am simply Christina. This is my letter to those who always feel like they are standing at the edge of someone else's spotlight, to those who have been the load-bearing wall in a house of cards for far too long. You might feel like leaving means you are nothing, but that is the lie they told you to keep the servers running. You are not the rent you pay to exist in their world, you are the architect. You do not need their permission to be luminous, and you certainly do not owe them your soul to keep their stage lights on. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to save your own life, share this story. And if you're still standing there, holding the match, just know that the most profound peace you will ever feel is waiting for you on the other side. Thanks for watching.